examining consciousness, the formal trend is to observe its core reality from an ontological or phenomenological standpoint. These two methods of understanding reality give us an interesting look into how Sartre's essay on existence and the concept of being, the description of the self as expressed in his early work Being and Nothingness, relate with Buddhism. Sartre's method for explaining his position on the self is the phenomenological one, utilized before him by Husserl and Heidegger. Phenomenology is an approach that begins with an exploration of phenomena, simply conscious experience, as a means to grasp reality. On the other hand, the ontological viewpoint will retain that consciousness is the receptivity of itself, and the itself being the object. We look to explore the idea of John Paul Sartre's view of consciousness and nothingness and parallel it to the Buddhist notion of nothingness. The prevalent question is simply, is consciousness transcendental? Is it a positional reflection of the self, thus a certain lucid phenomenon? Or is it a projection of something hidden, beyond the self and empty? This question is explored in Sartre's explanation of nothingness and the Buddhist notion of absolute emptiness, or sunyata. John Paul Sartre is regarded as one of the most profound thinkers of the 20th century. Sartre was born in 1905 in Paris. Sartre became attracted to philosophy upon reading Henri Bergson's essay on the immediate data of consciousness. He studied in Paris at the elite École Normale Supérieure, where he met Simone de Beauvoir, who went on to become a noted thinker, writer, and feminist. It is documented that the two became inseparable and lifelong companions, initiating a romantic relationship. Sartre is one of those writers for whom a determined philosophical position is the center of their artistic being. Although drawn from many sources, for example Husserl's idea of a free, fully intentional consciousness and Heidegger's Existentialism, the Existentialism Sartre formulated and popularized is profoundly original. The basis for Sartre's Existentialism is found in the transcendence of the ego, its popularity, and that its author reached a climax in the 40s, and Sartre's theoretical writings as well as novels and plays constitute one of the main inspirational sources of modern literature. He wrote The Wall, which emphasized the arbitrary and social aspects of people, the situations that people find themselves in, and try to deal with the absurdity rationally. This subsequently led to the idea of absurd, which was the next chapter in existentialism literature. He lived his life through his works, where many events helped pave for his thought and understanding the chaos surrounding him. A novelist, Iris Murdoch, once said, "To understand John Paul Sartre is to understand something important about the present time." None other event changed his life than being drafted into the French army during World War II as a meteorologist, only to be captured by Germans as a POW for 9 months. After the war, he got involved with Simone de Beauvoir and others in a resistance movement called Socialism et Liberté. Sartre's existentialism stressed the primary of the thinking person and concrete individual experience as a source of knowledge. He uses his activism as a way to reveal that existence and freedom found through the individual instead of a systematic way of living, free from authority. He was involved in the freedom of those oppressed and those suffering, such as the anti-colonialism efforts with notable thinkers in France over the occupation of Algeria. He contributed to several clandestine magazines that were political reviews of modern times as his way of activism. The suspicion of the world that is, in its suchness, or in Buddhist terms the great doubt, is at the heart of uncertainty. This doubt is arrived due to consciousness itself, doubting everything, even itself. Both believe the ultimate way to which one can understand the domain in which they live in, to see reality and the self as evanescence, to see life as unsatisfactory, or dukkha, and selflessness, anatman, the tragic condition of man, is to take the inaugural step towards absurdity and peel into nihilism. Here arises in the abyss that is nihility, the intuition of emptiness finally settles as the basic understanding of the human condition. To rid of this congenital ignorance, one must be in denial of everything, repudiate conventional experience, and grasp nihility. This is the platform at which Sartre and Buddha. The essay Being and Nothingness examines man, the being who questions being, and concludes that he is both his body occupying a place in the world, that is, an object among objects, and a subject or a consciousness reflecting on objects. The very nature of consciousness is such, he says, therefore to be and to know itself are one and the same. He gives a positional reference in that consciousness of an object is consciousness of being, indicating the consciousness of something. For Sartre there exist non-conscious beings independent and external to consciousness. The two absolutely separate regions of beings are established, one that is the being of the pre-reflective ego and the being of the phenomenon. The ego is external to consciousness, and the pre-reflective ego is non-personal. The ego does not come into existence until the original consciousness has been made the object of reflection. Sartre refers to this realm of non-consciousness beings as the in itself, while the consciousness is referred to as the for itself. This is when we get an insight into the concept of Sartre's reflective ego, as establishment for his primary understanding. The The reflective ego establishes this consciousness, which is the reason for certain reactions, such as love and hate. The intention is the consciousness to the outside, such that in order to avoid an infinite regress, there must be an immediate, non-cognitive relation to the self, to itself. The only limitation on this is that the in itself can be viewed from an infinite number of perspectives, so that although a single instance of consciousness does reveal the in itself as it actually is, it does not reveal it completely in terms of the infinite number of perspectives from which the in itself can be viewed. This is a positional in that it transcends itself in order to reach an object, and it exhausts itself in the same positioning. For Sartre, the for itself is never anything but the revelation of the in itself. Therefore, like the in itself, it has no essence. Additionally, the for itself is the origin of nothingness or negation. The for itself is capable of recognizing the possibility of non-existence of the in itself. Thus, the for itself is the origin of nothingness and negation. Eating cycle, which is best characterized by impermanence, suffering, and non-self. What is commonly called a self is really only the collection of what we call the five skandhas, or heaps. Reality arises when the ego itself opens up and looks to reality within itself in a subjective transformation. Nishitani says that to come to a realization that the self sees birth and death as a basis of existence and embracing the fundamental nihility of our existence. By the simple awareness of standing at the ground of nihility is one able to achieve a subjectivity that can in no way be objectified. In other words, the self-understanding can in no way contradict itself, therefore being nullified. To Nishitani, the nihility is a realization that the self were itself to become nihility, and in so doing become aware of itself from the limits of self-existence. This is very similar to Sartre's notion of the for itself realizing the in itself. Buddhism says that form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form, form is not other than emptiness. Simply state, nihilism is the realization of all. Understanding comes in light when you determine by choice what is not and to be, and also be able to understand what is. It is through this kneeling capacity that the for itself can distinguish from the in itself. In order for consciousness to be posited as absent and non-existence, it should go under the realization of non-cessation. Sartre argued that if an object is to be posited as absent or not existing, then there must be involved the ability to constitute an emptiness or nothingness with respect to it. Negation is applied to the self by the for itself, and in this way the consciousness is non-being. This is the central idea in his work being in nothingness. In order to introduce a negation into being from the outside, nothingness is logically subsequent to it, since it supposes being in order to deny it. Simply put, man is being through whom nothingness comes into the world. This nothingness, which isolates being, is what Sartre claims as a human freedom. It would be still a greater mistake to reduce his existentialism to very simplistic elements, such as crude nihilism, as often has been done. To Sartre, human freedom precedes essence in man and makes it possible, the essence of human being. The freedom, he says, is the human being putting his past out of play by secreting his own nothingness. This freedom arises in the form of... To Buddhists, there lies a separation in its nothingness. To Nishitani and the traditional Zen approach, nihility is absolute negativity with regard to the very being of all those various things and phenomena just referred to. Death is absolute negativity with regard to life itself. The in itself ruptures and has no meaning. The nihility for Sartre points in a different direction than Buddhists. The nothingness is a revelation of being. As described by Sartre, consciousness causes things there to be something and not nothing. The nothingness has no meaning without the being. Sartre holds a materialist position that external reality does exist. For Buddhism, external reality is as non-existence as the self. It is through this process of negation and nihility that the for itself recognizes its total freedom and responsibility. Its freedom is when the nothingness is used to because the consciousness is not enough. If it were a full being, then it could not be free to choose being. But since it has an insufficiency of being, since it is not one with the real world, it is free to set up those relations with being which it desires. This is similar to Schopenhauer's reason, the fact that which is created by will turns back upon the will to deny it. Therefore we have a similar Buddhist concept of interdependence. The partition between these two modes of thought, it seems, is the aftermath of this new awareness that arises from nihility and denial. The Buddhist attack on Sartre would be that the world that opens up but cannot close. Buddhists would state that in doing this, the subject is still being deceived and bound. In order to gain true freedom from the subject, must realize the impermanence and illusionary status of external experience. Buddhists will say that the necessary contact with the illusionary external world and suffering, the subject will understand that he is being biased of his supposed freedom on an illusion which can only bring pain.